Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology. I'm Dan, and in this video I'd like to come back to what I did a few weeks ago on Indigenous poetry when I introduced several poetry anthologies, and I'd like to show you some of the full collections that I have by Indigenous poets. We've got a lot of work to do today, let's get started. The first one I have here is LeAnne Howe, The Evidence of Red. LeAnne Howe is a citizen of the Choctaw Nation, and she's well known for the novel Shell Shaker especially. She's also a playwright and filmmaker and a scholar. In this book you have a mixture of poetry and short fiction pieces. It's a nice balance between prose and poetry if you like to have more variety in your reading, or if you're interested in history. I think this collection is great because you will find lots of references that you want to follow up, and you will learn a lot more about the context in that way. Now I'm going to look at three different Anishinaabe poets. The first one here is Heid Erdrich, whom I also mentioned in the previous video. I will post the link to that video below. And her collection is called Curator of Ephemera at the New Museum for Archaic Media. So already you can see some of the themes that will be in this collection, which is largely about communication and technology and curating. And the art also reflects some futuristic elements that you can find. There is beautiful art by the artist Andrea Carlson. The poetry itself is quite experimental. You can see a lot of exploration of form, different ways of writing, or more visual explorations. The next one is by Kimberly Blaeser, Absentee, Indians, and Other Poems. Kimberly Blaeser grew up on the White Earth Reservation, and like many other Native American writers, she has published in different genres. She's also a well-known scholar in the field, and her work is really interesting. Now we've got Weweni by Margaret Noodin, and there's something really special about this collection, which is that every poem is written down in Anishinaabe first, and then translated, or rather rewritten into English. So it's not exactly a literal translation, it's almost like a second piece, but they reflect one another. I don't, unfortunately, understand Anishinaabe. This is what it looks like. And then on the other side, the English version. And that's the case for every poem. I do try to read the Anishinaabe aloud to kind of get a feel for the sounds, even though I don't necessarily do it right. And then read the English version and kind of see how they might echo one another. I think it's a really interesting work. And Margaret Noodin is also a scholar who's doing a lot of work around the relationship between contemporary Native American writers who write in English and language as something that comes from the land and is a necessary element. The next one is by a First Nation poet, Shannon Webb-Campbell. I Am a Body of Land. And I didn't know about Shannon Webb-Campbell. I found her book on the publisher's website when I was ordering something different, and decided to take this one as well. So Shannon Webb-Campbell is mixed Indigenous, Mi'kmaq, and she is based in Montreal. And this, I think, is her second book. Yes, and it really explores the relationship between the body and the land and looks at trauma from pretty close up. A lot of emotional work, but also always based on the material, like the body and the land kind of as a grounding entity from which to explore other experiences. Now I have this collection by Shuck titled Smuggling Cherokee, and It says at the back that Kim Shuck is a mixed Tsalagi, Soak Fox, and Polish educator, writer, and weaver. I'd never heard of Kim Shuck before either. I just found this book in a secondhand bookshop and picked it up and really enjoyed it. I have to say, I love the titles of many of these poems. The Logic Within the Relationship is one title, or The Dream of Being a Larger Mammal, or The Needs of Scientific Research Must Be Respected, etc. So yeah, that's an interesting book that I just stumbled upon by chance. Now here's a poet whom I really, really like. This is Milk Black Carbon by Joan Naviyuk Kane. So she comes from Alaska. She's an Inupiaq and lives in Anchorage. So there is something really special about her poetry, I find. It's extremely detailed, extremely atmospheric, and it is like a search for something. Let me find a short poem that I can read. This is When the World Was Milk. Seized between breaths, the hard mother of the brain, twice pierced through, a tremble too with the anesthetist's imprecision. I could not walk for days, but fed or tried to feed, shuffling flowers, stiff and white and dry as paper. For I could not lift a pitcher to refill the water drawn out beneath them. Men surround me, or will, all yellow sclera, thunder, and fallow. I've got quite a few more actually, and they're all by queer, LGBTQ, two-spirit poets. The first one is Feed by Tommy Pico. Tommy Pico has written a trilogy, and Feed, I think, is it's the fourth book in the Thebes tetralogy. It's written almost like a letter by the main character, and it says a lot about relationships, about indigenous identity, and how to live as an indigenous queer person in the United States. Tommy Pico is originally from the Viejas Indian reservation of the Kumeyaay Nation, and he lives in Los Angeles and Brooklyn. He's quite a successful poet now, and is really good. If you're interested in queer poetry, this is a really important book. It uses a lot of colloquial language, it uses a lot of food imagery, as the title can suggest, and it's very experimental, very enjoyable to read. Next is Qwo-Li Driskill's Walking with Ghosts. Qwo-Li is a Cherokee two-spirit queer writer. Qwo-Li has written some really important scholarship, including some leading work on queer indigenous studies, and their poetry is quite raw, quite hard. There is a lot of violence, but also very tender and beautiful. I love the title Walking with Ghosts. It also shows like the connection that you can forge with the past, and I think a sense of kinship that includes people who walk a similar path before you. Then we have Arielle Twist, Disintegrate, Dissociate, and that's quite a recent work, and it was published in 2019. It starts with the poem Dear White Cis Men, which I think is the best way to start any collection. She lives in Nova Scotia, and she's a Nehiyao, two-spirit and trans woman. This is a really good exploration of indigeneity through a trans lens. It focuses a lot on relationships, and especially relationships as they transform. A lot about grief, a lot about trauma, a lot about identity and survival. Then we have Joshua Whitehead, Full Metal Indigiqueer. This is really something else. Joshua Whitehead is an Ojibwe two-spirit storyteller and academic from Peguis First Nation in Manitoba. This uses a lot of digital technology for the poems themselves. It starts with black pages out of which some dot appears that becomes the poetry collection. There's a lot of use of coding and abbreviations and graphs. If you're into digital media, if you're into coding, this is like the coding version of poetry. Extremely adventurous. So it's about an indigenous two-spirit invention called Zoa. And Zoa infects, invades, and infests as a virus inside canonical and popular works in order to recenter the lives of two-spirit individuals. So this poetry sees big, right? It references Shakespeare, Spencer, Dickens, Milton, but then adds some cyberpunk vibes to them, pop culture, and it's like a complete reinvention of the canon by deconstructing it and adding a completely different twist on them. Yes. Next is Bury Me in Thunder by Sean J. Sean J is an agender writer of Zilligai Syan descent. I'm probably not pronouncing this right, and I apologize for that. So this is Sean J's debut collection, and it's pretty phenomenal. I'm reviewing this collection for a journal. It won't come back before spring. I'll put a link at some point. It's a difficult poetry collection to approach because so much of it is obscured, but at the same time, the way in which it's obscured is full of amazing imagery. And there's a lot of this is about trauma and how to refer to traumatic experience without perpetuating the same type of violence again. There's a lot of natural imagery in these poems, and it kind of weaves fiction into reality in very novel ways, and it's really beautiful. So I would recommend that. They have already won several prizes despite this being their first collection, and I think they're very promising. I can't wait to find out more about their writing. And finally, This Wound is a World by Billy Ray Belcourt, probably the most well-known of these collections. He won the 2017 Best Canadian Poetry Book Award and has been doing great work ever since. Billy Ray Belcourt is from the Driftpile Cree Nation, and he studies for a PhD at the University of Alberta. And he's also a two-spirit writer who writes a lot about what it's like to be queer and indigenous, both in terms of relationships, but also relationship to your heritage. I'm currently reading his second book, which is not poetry, but a collection of essays titled A History of My Brief Body. So this was my quick run through the Indigenous poetry collections that I have here. There will be a part 2 for that because I have some of those books elsewhere as well. So I'll talk you through everything that I have at home. But there are countless other poetry collections that you could be reading if you're interested in Indigenous poetry. So I wish you a wonderful exploration of what may be a new topic for you. I hope you decide to pick up one of those books, and let me know in the comments if you know any other Indigenous poets, or if you decide to go for one of these. I'll see you again next week. Bye.